Okay, so yeah, I'm Tim Becker. You don't have to call me Mr. You can just call me Tim. I'm going to assume everybody knows what EMB is. EMB, it's about the smart card on credit cards. I work with these quite a lot. I've developed, where I was involved in the development of several operating systems that run on the chip, and I do other consulting in that field. I also built this little microcontroller program that sometimes helps understanding what goes on inside of here or talking to this or similar devices. This is sort of a strange talk. It's not really, I'm not presenting any really innovative hacks or anything crazy new. But these chip cards are a really, really nice toy to hack around with. On the one hand, you probably have one, and it's something that you're not really aware of what it actually does. Also, from the hacking point of view, this is a really, really old, all these standards are really, really old. And there's a number of issues that are kind of in the specs already that make it an interesting target. I think it just has kind of a steep learning curve, and you just have to get used to the terminology and know which standards you need to read. Luckily, a lot of the standards that you'll use are publicly available. Yeah, and I just want to sort of give you a small ramp up to help you get started with it. And in the course of the talk, we'll do a single transaction. I have a reader connected here, and we'll kind of we'll see what goes on between a terminal and a real card. So the first specification that we'd have is PCSC. It was originally the Windows services to connect to smart card readers, and basically every sort of smart card reader that you get nowadays is going to support that, which is really nice because almost all operating systems are going to support these PCSC readers. What I used was this GitHub smart card thing is a Ruby binding to that. These are some pointers. This OpenSCDP is a JavaScript-based platform to talk with EMV cards, which is not quite as absurd as it sounds, because there's in the factory where these are personalized, the programs that are written to generate the data to put onto the card are actually, or one of the standards for that is JavaScript, which is kind of weird because everything is byte-oriented and JavaScript has some difficulties with bytes. And this open smart card development platform has that same API that's used. And finally, I wanted to point to something which is really strange, but very, very nice. MasterCard has published this terminal simulator thing. And they're usually really, really restrictive about this technology and won't really let you know anything, but they basically have these programs that behave just like a credit card terminal. And if you want to get started, these are really nice because you just sort of plug in a normal card reader, hold the card to it. If it's a contactless card, stick the card in, and you can see how a proper terminal is supposed to behave. So you don't just have to read specs, you can see it live and in action. It's a Windows program though. So basically, to get started, you just need any run-of-the-mill smart card reader. So this is what I have. This is what I kept doing at the beginning, hoping that nothing crashes, and to make sure that the smart card reader is there. And then I can just say, show card, and I get some information about the card that we're going to go through in a little bit. There's two different types of protocols that contactless card that contact cards can speak, which are T0 and T1. So this card is a T0 card, and the ATR is the answer to reset, which are a bunch of bytes. Okay, so yeah, that's going to come up. The main specification for communicating with smart cards of any sort are ISO specifications 7816. The stuff that you would want to look at are 3 and 4. Everything, all the other standards there are completely irrelevant. And these two specifications describe the basics on a application level of how to communicate with the card. So how commands are structured, how things are encoded. Everything below that is really just on an electrical level. Everything above that is ISO stuff. They just defined lots and lots of things that nobody uses. So this answer to reset that we received, it describes physical card characteristics, like how quickly the baud rate of the card, but it also has these historical bytes which identify the producer of the card. A lot of the time you can just turn it over and you can, up here you can see this is an Obertorcard. There's really not many companies making EMB cards. So that provides you some information, but unless you really want to talk to the card on an electrical level and you have to figure out the baud rate and the communication settings for the card, you don't want to worry about that. So ISO also has these weird, this is one of those file system things, and the EMB people decided to just do something completely different. So they don't use this file system. So these 7816 protocols are, specifications are very confusing to read because you just don't know what parts of the specs apply to you or not. So the important thing in the central communication unit between a smart card and your program is an APDU, an application protocol data unit. And the important thing to realize when we're looking at all these slides, it's really just a small amount of bytes that are stuck behind each other. So basically, if demo select, what did I want to demo? So the first thing you have to do, there's a number of applications or files. There's sort of a fine line between that and smart cards. The first thing that you have to do is select the application that you want to use. And the APDUs are always structured in the same way. The first byte, the 0, is the class of command that you're sending. The second is the instruction byte, which is the actual command that you're sending. You can send 2 parameter bytes. Then you send the length of the data that you're going to send, and in the case of select, you're sending the file name. So this A000031010 is the standard file name for Visa, for the Visa application that's on cards. The T0 versus T1 is fairly irrelevant. The main difference that you would have, and sometimes you have to program it and sometimes you don't, is that so you have this LC byte and you have an LE byte. If you expect data back from the card, you would add this LE byte. But in T0, you can't both send data to the card and tell it to send you data back. So you have to leave out the LE byte, and then the card will say, oh, I have data to send you back, and then you have to send a second command to get the data back. But those are details, which are important once you get started, but that's the only difference that you really have to deal with T1 and T0. The first time I did this talk, I said nobody uses T1 for, at least for EMB cards. Turns out it's used a little bit, and there's some subtle bugs that go along with this T0 and T1 thing, but we can talk about that later. So to do a select, I'm going to select a PSE file. PSE is payment service environment, and the payment service environment is basically a table of contents of what applications are on the card. So you can see that, is this large enough or should I make it bigger? Okay. This 00, A4 that we had, the first parameter 04 says I want to select using a file name. There's other mechanisms to select. And the file name is this long, and this is 1.ps payment. Yeah, it's right here. That's the file name, and I send that. I don't send the length that I expect to get back because this is a T0 card. And the card says answers with 6126. What you're actually always looking for is 9000. That's okay. That's HTTP 200. In this case, the 61 says, I still have bytes to send back to you, so please issue a get response APDU. And the APDU, the get response APDU looks like this. I tell it I want 26 bytes back. I'm not sending it any bytes, so it can do that. And then it sends me the basically the file entry for this PSE, which is not all that interesting. It just tells me the file name and some little stuff. But then I read record. Okay, I'll just skip that part. So basically, it's just files going back and forth. The next set of specifications so these are still the standard commands that are in the 7816 standards. Those, of course, you have to buy from ISO for a lot of money. EMVCo publishes all the standards for the EMV protocol that's spoken to the cards. And there's just a huge number of books that they have. 4 books for the central thing. There's a CPS, which is how the cards are personalized in the factory. And the 4 books are basically kind of like, you can kind of imagine it like the specification for XML. It shows you how to set up a protocol that talks to cards, but it doesn't really define a specific protocol. And EMV also publishes CPA, Common Payment Application, which is a really, really long specification which defines one specific card protocol that you could put on cards, but nobody uses it. MasterCard and Visa have their own protocols that are set up on EMV. So book 1 is basically what you need if you don't want to buy 7816. It really talks about the electrical characteristics, how to talk with smart cards, how APDUs are set up and things like that. Book 2 is all the crypto and keys and key derivation things, and kind of interesting, not what we're going to go into. There's a lot lower hanging fruits than actually dealing with the crypto. And book 3 is the actual application. It describes the commands that are sent to the card and received from the card. And if you want to deal with this, because all of the data that you get from the card are in TLV structures, so if you have something identifying a piece of data, you just have a 5A stuck in front of it, and you have to know what that means. And at the end of book 3, this is really the most important thing. There's a data dictionary, a big data dictionary table that maps all the tag names to, or all the tags to tag names. So, and the TLV encoding is defined somewhere. And finally, there's a book 4, which does cardholder attendant, and so that describes what the requirements for a card terminal. I've never really used that. It might be interesting if you want to build a fake terminal to, read. It's very clearly defined how a terminal is supposed to react, what sort of messages it's supposed to display. So it might be interesting for that, but not really just to play with the card. So CPS and CPA I've talked about. They might be interesting to read into, but you don't really need them to get started. So the actual specifications for the protocols that MasterCard and Visa uses are proprietary. Visa is really nice about it that they actually give you a list of the specifications. MasterCard, you don't even know what specifications exist. And you kind of have to dig fairly deep to they're not publicly available. So we're going to go and do the transaction now. And basically, I kind of describe it. You shake hands, you introduce yourself, what we already did. You ask, okay, what applications are available on the card? You get that from the PSE, or you just try a number of well-known application names. And then the worst date ever, you don't just talk about yourself and ask some questions. You say, hi, this is me, I'm a terminal. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then ask me some questions for me to ask you about yourself, which are basically, give me these records, give me this record, give me that record, and once you have all of those records assembled, you have enough data to actually do the transaction in the terminal. You need to confirm the data. There's a small certificate confirming that the data that you get from the card is actually the data that the bank intended you to see. Finally, you do cardholder confirmation, which can be anything from my favorite cardholder confirmation method is nothing. But it could be a PIN, it could be a PIN that's checked by the card, or they're more involved cryptographic. It could just be a signature as well. And then finally, you get the card to generate a cryptogram for you. It could be done with that, depending on the fraud settings of the terminal, or you need to send that cryptogram to the bank, get the bank to confirm the cryptogram, get it sent back, send the card, the response from the bank, and then the card will finally give you a certificate saying this transaction has been successfully completed. So if I had been able to remember the correct parameters for that, I would have read that there's a VSDC application on here. Excellent. And this is the same thing again. I just did a, I basically would have found out this application name from the PSE directory file. I select that. The card tells me I have 2C bytes to tell you about this file that you just selected. And these are the bytes that it sends back. And so we need to decode the TLV. And so, further. This is a file control information template. It has this name, so tag 84 is the tag for dedicated file name. It contains some proprietary file control information data, which in this case is the application label. That's what the terminal will display to you when you put your card in and it says Visa, Master, or whatever your card says. And it can contain some information, for example, language priority that a person would have. So my card has, because I'm from Germany, it has DE-EN. And typically when I'm in Germany, I'll be greeted with German. Sometimes when you're in a foreign country, you would also get greeted with German because the terminals actually honor that. Typically, they don't. So the next thing is tell me what I should ask you about myself, and that is a command that's called get processing options. Which is not really that, the response is not really that interesting to decode because it's just it's a response message template format and there's 14 bytes in it. But this is really where the card describes itself and tells you where to get further, what else to ask the card, what other information to ask about it. So you send it PDAL data, processing data, object list. You always have these objects list. In this case, we just sent it empty data because the card didn't request any data. And then it sends back an AIP and an AFL. The AIP are the first bytes of this. So in our case, it was 5C00. And this basically describes the functionality of the card, what the card is able to do. So this card supports SDA, DDA. It can do cardholder verification in some form. Cardholder verification can do nothing. The terminal does its own. The terminal is asked to also do its own risk management. So maybe require a signature or something like that. And finally, the card doesn't only support offline. You can send things to the bank, get stuff back, and get a confirmation from the issuer. SDA is static data analysis, which would include just you read a bunch of data from the card. And to authorize this data, to make sure that it's valid data, you read another piece of data from the card, which is a certificate signing some data that you read, which is completely it doesn't really make sense because cards are trivial to clone that way. So a couple of years later, they started with dynamic data authentication. when cryptographic coprocessors got cheap enough that you could put them into cards. So now the card can contain a certificate chain. The card contains its own public key certificate. And instead of just statically signing data that you want to validate from the card, the terminal can send a random number, and the random number and the data from the card are signed together by the card. So this card doesn't support it. These sort of cards that don't support that aren't really in use anymore. That's the sort of transaction we're going to do because it's easier and it shows the principles. So the next part is the application file locator. Because the amount of data that you can read from the card is stuck in 1 byte. So one piece of data that you can get back from the card is always maximum 256 bytes long. So the data has to be structured somehow, and it's structured into a short file ID and a record number. And this AFL is basically a list of short file IDs and record numbers that you want to read. They're always 4 byte long entries, so the AFL that we had, there's 3 entries. And then it gets kind of weird, and this is the stuff that's confusing to when you start working with it. The first byte identifies the short file ID, but it's shifted to the left by 3. So the topmost 5 bits show the short file ID. So in this case, these three entries here tell us, okay, we want to read from short file ID 1, 2, and 3. The second byte, so there can be a number of records in these short files. So the second byte tells us at which record to start reading. Nothing is shifted here. It's just every single one of those says start reading short file ID 1 at record 1, start reading short file ID 2 at record 1, and so forth. The third byte tells you where to stop reading. So from the first one, we just read, from the first short file ID, we only read 1 record. From the second one, we read 3 records. And from the third one, we read 2 records. And the third one, the third byte says how many of these records that you read from this short file should you use when you're doing the, when you're signing the data with either an SDA certificate or a DDA certificate. So which of these data, so not actually all of the data that you get from the card is authenticated by the certificate, but only specific little bits of the data. So, and in this case, only a single field of the seven records, only 1 record of the 7 records that we're reading is actually getting authenticated. So, I cheated a little bit here, and instead of having to mistype, so this is basically what we decoded earlier. We read short file ID 1, record number 1, short file, and we only read 1 record from there. 2 was 1 and 2 and 3, and from the third one we read 2 records. So that was that worked out correctly. And the one that we're signing is from for the first record of short file ID 3. So this is all of the stuff that we read from the record decoded, and we're going to kind of go through that. But let's have a look first at what data is this actually. So this is, there's always a wrapper tag 70 around the whole thing, and then there's only 1 record in here, 5A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's a 5F34, which is 1 bit long. So if we look at the decoded data, 5A, so only the actual card number and the PAN sequence number are actually authenticated of all the data that we're getting back from the card. So let's see what the sort of data that we get. One of the first things was service code, and this is just an easy one. It's 201. This is an old thing that was on the magnetic stripes as well, which is another usage indicator. What are you allowed to use this for? And it's fairly nonsensical data. It says 2 says this is an integrated circuit card. 0 says a normal one, and the third one, the one, says no restrictions. So this doesn't really provide any sort of data, and there's a lot of these sort of nonsensical data fields around. This is much more interesting, application usage control. So it's FF80. And this is a bitmap that says what can I actually use this card for? And this table describes the first byte. The first byte, and since it's FF, all of the ones are set. So this card is valid for domestic cash transaction, international cash transactions, and it has the same. So they differentiate between cash, goods, services, which is kind of a strange differentiation because it's a very thin line. What's a restaurant meal? Is that a good or a service? And finally, you can use it as an ATM, and you can also use it at other terminals other than an ATM, whatever that means. Nobody really is able to explain this to you. And the second byte, the 80, this is the only restriction on it. Domestic cashback is allowed. Cashback is basically when you pay at the supermarket and you say, well, okay, the bill was 48 euros, but I want 60 euros, or give me another 20 euros back in cash, which is another higher risk level. They allow that in the country that the card was issued in, but not internationally, because who knows what could happen. So the next. I'm not going to keep switching back and forth. The values I have on the screen are always the values that we read from the screen. So CVM list, that's the cardholder verification method list. And that describes what I said at the beginning, how the terminal is supposed to verify that the user is actually in possession of the cards. And it starts off with 2 amounts, which are really never used. So you could have several of these lists, but people don't really do that. And following those 2 amounts, it says, okay, if you have something between these 2 amounts, this is the list of cardholder verification methods that you should use in certain circumstances. So the first byte, so there's always 4 bytes, and the red and black alternating are the entries. The first byte describes which verification method to use. And so here, this card supports 4 verification methods. 1, you can send a PIN in plain text to the card. The second verification method is you can collect a signature in paper. The card supports that. The third one is you can send an encrypted PIN to the bank, but please not to me, because I won't be able to decrypt it. And finally, the fourth verification method is the nicest one. You don't really have to do anything. Now, this incidentally is also, it might not really be clear because there's a lot of wrapper and magic and stuff around the demo, but what you saw on the screen, basically, these are actually the bytes going back and forth from the card. There's no crypto between the terminal and the card. So this was a really classic hack that 2 or 3 years ago, that at ATMs, cards are never supposed to allow the terminal or the ATM to send it a PIN in plain text because of skimmers. So cards are configured, if they know they're in an ATM, they send a cardholder verification method list that says you can send me an encrypted PIN, or you can check the PIN with the bank, but you can't send me please don't send me an unencrypted PIN. But because this whole protocol isn't cryptographically secured, people figured out, oh, okay, it could be really nice to have a skimmer in between there. And when it sees this command come by, or it sees the CVM list coming back from the card, I'll just switch the CVM list around and I'll tell it, no, the only thing I accept is an unencrypted PIN. And that way, you have all of the information nicely done. You don't even have to decode the magstripe data. You have everything there, and you've also gotten the stupid ATM to send you the encrypted PIN. So there's a lot of reuse of terminal code out there. So the second byte in the CVM list is under which conditions these should be used. And here, and this is also kind of typical, all of these conditions of more secure, whatever you want to call it, actually using a PIN or something, is optional. You know, if you can if you can actually check it, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. And finally, the last one that we had, which was you don't need to do anything, that's always valid. You can always use that one. Okay, so the bottom, these were the last things that came back. Issuer action codes. Now this is the card telling the terminal how it should behave. These are long bitmaps. And there are different checks that the terminal can do. For example, collect a signature. And these bits in here describe, while the terminal is doing the checks, it sets this bitmap, and if these match, if it matches one of these, for example, in the IAC online, that means if one of these bits is set, you have to go online. You can't do an offline transaction with this card. The default one is you have to go online, but if you can't, then you can still do an offline transaction with the card. And we can see there's only one case that the card defines where the terminal is supposed to deny, supposed to ask for a denial. Which, ironically, it's the second byte, the first bit in the first nibble of the second byte. So, second byte, right here, requested service not allowed for card product. So the card just tells, if you're not allowed to do a transaction with me, you have to decline it, which is kind of obvious. But in most other cases, it just said, something failed, I don't have a card number, I failed the transaction. And in those cases, you have to talk to the bank, else you can ask the card to authorize the transaction offline. Boring. So the next thing is we've read all this data, and we have to confirm that it's actually true, because I can build my own card and I can put another card number in there. So basically, we received this signed static application data. And we can see, what are we going to do? We might do the demo. It's kind of, it's not that exciting. So so it's all a big PKI scheme. It's a nice non-standard. There's no X501 or anything. They have all of their own certificate formats, and the terminal is expected to have a number of root certificates from the card schemes built into the terminal. Obviously, the terminal can't have root certificates for every bank in the world in it. So the bank basically provides its own root certificate within the card. So that's this issuer public key certificate right here. When we decode it, this is basically so this. This issuer public key certificate, we decrypt with the public key of MasterCard or Visa. And what we get back is this thing, which aligns with this table. You have to look out for the 6A at the beginning and the BC at the end, then you know you decoded the things correctly. So basically, there's a number of fields. Certificate expiration date right here is December 2030. And the interesting part is the issuer public key, of course, in this certificate. Now, because all of these records can only be 256 bytes long, an RSA key that you would use nowadays actually wouldn't fit in there. So the card also sends back this the exponent, of course, and the issuer public key remainder, which always confused me because of the similarity with modulus. But this is actually the data that didn't fit into the certificate. So you have to extract the first half of the issuer's public key out of this cryptographically signed certificate, and the rest is just stuck in some field. And there's a hash over the whole thing then that's also stored in the certificate, but I'm not a cryptographer. It just seems not very you might as well just have the whole public key outside and just save the hash. So now you have the issuer certificate, and with that you can decrypt the SDA, the static data authentication certificate that actually signs the data that's on the card. Once you take that apart, it looks like this. It's more or less the same. Again, you have the header 6A and then the trailer BC. It has a different format. It consists mainly of padding and then only has the SHA hash of the data that the AFL at the beginning, this record needs to be signed. So that signature is in here. So all of the other data that we read from the card, including the issuer certificate, is unauthenticated. Like I said, this static data analysis isn't used anymore, and you're not allowed to use it anymore. But the newer systems have a system called DDA, dynamic data analysis, and that basically works the same way. But then there's another certificate in the certificate chain which contains the private key pair or the public key of the card itself that you can use to authorize the card. And it can have a fourth certificate which contains the key for encrypted PIN communication with the card. These certificates basically all look the same. They have a different signed data format, but apart from that, it's always the same thing. Yeah, I already mentioned that. Nowadays, you don't just ask for a static certificate and trust that the card is in order and use that to authenticate an online transaction. Now you have the card generate you a dynamic certificate with a piece of data that you provide the card, so you can prove that the card is in possession of its own certificate. So now we need to verify the card holder. For that, there's a get data command where we can first check the value of the pin try counter on the card. So the pin try counter keeps increasing on the card until some limit is reached every time that you try to enter a pin. In this case, the pin try counter is at, no, it keeps decreasing, and when it reaches 0, you're not allowed to use it. In this case, the pin try counter is at 14, which I think is kind of strange. Okay, but now we can do a verified transaction. That doesn't provide us any data back. It gives us this 9,000. Everything went okay. And the pin is in this really strange padded format. It's padded out with Fs. It starts with a 2. Then the second nibble says how long the pin is. So the pin of this card is 1, 2, 3, 4. The card said that was okay. So we've done the card holder verification. Finally, we need to verify the deal. We need a cryptogram from the card, and this is a static cryptogram from a triple desk key that's implanted into the card at the factory. One of the data that we read from the card, and in this case that wasn't even authenticated, is the CDAL list. And the CDAL list, so basically there are 2 generate cryptogram commands. And there's 2 CDALs. And basically the CDALs describe what data the card wants from the terminal in order to either verify or deny the transaction. In the first transaction, you can ask for an offline authorization, and the card expects this data to be there. So it wants the amount that it's authorizing. Amount other would be a cashback amount that you provided. It wants to know where the terminal is, the results of the terminal verification. Okay, a signature, and you checked it, and that was good. What currency the transaction in, the type, the date. The date, transaction type is this goods services and several other things. And it wants a random number because that will go into the cryptogram, and you can later hopefully prove that the cryptogram and what the terminal sent to it match. So This command is called generate AC, or first generate application cryptogram. And we've assembled all this data. The first 6 bytes were the amount. So we've done 1 cent, and then we can kind of go through here. This will be country. This is we're in Great Britain now. We're paying in pounds, and the date, and some transaction type information, and a random number, of course. And we know that we're getting back a positive response of some sort. And this is, again, TLV decoding. It really doesn't help us very much. So there's basically 3 things that you can ask for or get back from the card. They're called AAC, ARQC, and TC. TC is great. TC is, you're done. Transactions approved by the card, everything is fine. AAC sucks. It means you're not done, or you're done and the card didn't authorize it. And ARQC is basically saying, please do a second generate cryptogram. Please send my response to the bank, and then with the response from the bank, run a second generate cryptogram command. So this is the data we got back from our first generate cryptogram, and it's structured like this. There's a the first byte, the black 80, is cryptogram information data, and that will so in our case it was actually 40, so it's kind of non-deterministic. That is information about the cryptogram. What kind of cryptogram is it? Is it a decline? Is it an authorized? Or is it a go to the bank, ask them, and tell me what they told you? The second bytes, and so from my example, it was 03 application transaction counter. That's a central counter in the 16-bit counter in the card, which limits the entire lifetime of this card. Once this counter reaches FFFF, the card will kill itself. So we can see how many times I have done this. It's at 29 now, so I've done it 26 times since I made the slides. The next bytes are the actual, so you can see, from this information, you can see how often you've used your card ever. The next one is the actual application cryptogram, and this is the stuff that's no longer EMV. These are the things that in the proprietary specifications of the card organizations, but you don't really care. It's just basically encrypted data that you send to it. And finally, issuer application data. That's the stuff that you're supposed to send to the bank in case the card wants a response from the bank. Oh, well, yeah. So this is the cryptogram information data, the table for the cryptogram information data, and I expected to get back 80, which would have been an ARQC, which says please talk to the bank about this, and then tell me what they said. And these cryptograms are proof of the payment taking place and that the card was physically present. For denials, there's a little bit of extra information of why it was denied. For example, the pin try limit was exceeded or things like that. If the card had asked to go online, this card CDAL only has one additional field, which is authorization response code. That's what the bank sends back, and usually you might know this. Usually it's 00 if the transaction went through, or if you don't have any more money on your account, you would get 05. So the card just expects that code completely not authenticated in any way back, and it will base its final decision on that. So we got this response. The card authorized our 1 cent transaction offline. So these are basically the same sort of things again. So this is the preliminary conclusion. This is a really, really old protocol. It's very, very widely in use. So it can't really be changed too extremely. And it sort of mitigates the wrong risk. So if you look at this SDA thing, it's completely focused on cardholder fraud, that you wouldn't want to if somebody makes their own chip card with another card number on it, yeah, you can't do that because you don't have a possibility to create an SDA certificate that's in the certificate chain that goes all the way up to the credit card organizations. But the case of the cardholder being defrauded isn't really considered in this approach at all, because if I get your card, I can just copy all of that stuff, and I can reuse your certificate, and basically have a functional identical card to the one that you had. And it basically keeps going like that. It's usually just the risk model is very much centered on cardholder fraud and not on merchant fraud and not on systemic things. And that's the main sort of point there, this reluctance to part with legacy. I mean, this stuff is going to be around for a really, really long time. And the only things that they're changing are basically, occasionally they say the minimal RSA key length that you have to do, stuff that is completely crazily insecure, like being able to do an offline transaction without any sort of dynamic authentication you're not supposed to do it. And there are plans to maybe someday, possibly, just leave RSA behind and use ECC, because the key length for RSA are getting so long that the cards are getting too expensive. So, but that's not quite true, because there was a study recently that they were all crazy about, that you're more likely to leave your house without your wallet than you are without your phone. So they thought, well, that can't be. Then if people don't have their wallet, then they can't use credit cards to pay. So they started this contactless stuff more, and contactless is cool anyway. And that's mainly compatible with this EMV. The flow of transactions is a little bit more different, but it's also compatible. There's two modes. One, you basically do an EMV transaction, and then there's another mode where you basically just do a magnetic stripe transaction. So it really lowers the security that you have. So if you can read out somebody's contactless card fairly easily, and that might say, I really want to do the full EMV transaction, but if you clone it, you have all of the data that you need to do a magnetic stripe transaction. There are a couple of little dynamically generated bits, but because it's, no. And the other thing which is really nice, I think, about these attack vectors on contactless cards in the future, they're really promoting this acceptance of, previously if you came with a plain white card and wanted to pay with that, people would look at you funny, but they really want to accept alternative formats, not just phones, but keychains and bracelets and stuff. And so I think it's just kind of a matter of time where you can come with a shoebox and just hold that onto the card reader, and people won't really worry about it. Okay. So basically, this is just a short introduction. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow. I think it's over there in 101, around the same time. I hope it's not as hot, and I hope it doesn't rain. And basically doing the same sort of thing. If you're interested in it, I have a bunch of PCSC readers. We can get stuff set up on your computer. And that's it. So if you guys have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Any questions?
Thank you. Is with contactless cards, is there also no encryption between the card and or the phone and the terminal?
What cards?
With the contactless cards, and with if you use your phone, there's also no encryption between the phone and the terminal?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot more challenging to eavesdrop on. I mean, with a contact card, you just slide something in between and get that. I mean, it's easily doable. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people around here that can do it, but it's a harder level of sniffing wireless and on that close a space. But yeah, it's the same, and it still allows you, and I'm not I'm seriously not promoting like doing credit card fraud, but it's something. I mean, the lack of security makes it really nice to play around with because you can actually see what's going on with your card, and that still applies to contactless cards. So if you have a reader like this and you have either a contactless card or a credit card on your phone, you can do transactions with it, and you see clear text the entire transaction flow. They didn't change any of that.
Any other questions?
Hi. When you say contactless, you mean also a pay pass system from MasterCard?
Yeah. That's what. Whoops. Whoops. Where did I have the new form factors? Yeah. And PayPass and PayWave from Master and Visa. If they run, I mean, they can run on your actual plastic card, but they can just have either a sticker or a bracelet, or they're running on the phone, but it would be the exact same protocol going through.
Okay, so if you would take an NFC Desfire chip from MyFair, it's more secure than this, or?
A Desfire chip from MyFair. Well, you can't pay with a Desfire chip, so it's not really a comparison. And I mean, these keys are the security that the cards are supposed to provide is keeping these secret keys inside of the card and only giving the world outside of it access to things that were encrypted with the secret keys. And they're very secure at that. But all of the protocol around it is so complicated, and there's so many little knobs and whistles that there's lots of ways to get the card to generate something with its secret keys that it actually shouldn't be generating.
Thanks.
Any other?
One up here.
So with the verifying of the PIN, is that a prerequisite before it'll sign anything, or is that just for the terminal to kind of authenticate that the user knows what
It wasn't a prerequisite in this case because the CVM list said, I can do that if you would like to do it. The terminal will record a bitmap of all of the checks that it's done, and it will provide that to the card, and the card will use that in its own risk assessment, whether it accepts the transaction, denies it, or asks to be sent to the bank. The bank is also given a copy of the types of checks that the terminal did, and they can use it for their own risk management as well.
So the PIN isn't used at all to like unlock the signing mechanism. It's just kind of
No. Or an extension, I guess it kind of is, because if the card is configured to not sign a successful transaction if you didn't enter a correct PIN, then but it doesn't physically unlock anything. Okay, so thanks a lot.